I'm Elaine, 32 years old, and I've spent my life looking out for my younger brother Samuel. When he got engaged to Cynthia, I secretly paid for their entire luxury wedding despite her constant disrespect. At the rehearsal dinner, after months of subtle exclusion, Cynthia looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong here." Samuel said nothing. So I smiled, left quietly, and made a few calls. The next day they arrived at an empty venue. No food, no flowers, no wedding. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're viewing from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see what happens when someone pushes you too far. Samuel and I were always inseparable growing up despite our 4-year age difference. While other big sisters might have found their little brothers annoying, I adored him from the moment my parents brought him home from the hospital. I still remember peering into his crib, his tiny hand wrapping around my finger, creating a bond that would define both our lives. Our childhood in suburban Massachusetts was relatively happy until I turned 12, and Samuel was 8. That's when our parents' marriage fell apart. The fighting had been going on for years, but they finally decided to divorce after Dad met someone else at his accounting firm. The split wasn't amicable, and Samuel and I became collateral damage in their bitter separation. Our father, Walter, moved out immediately and seemed to start a new life overnight. Within 6 months, he had remarried his coworker and became stepfather to her children. His visits with us became increasingly sporadic, and when we did see him, he seemed distracted and eager to get back to his real family. Each canceled visit broke Samuel's heart a little more, and I'd find him crying in his room, wondering what he'd done wrong. Our mother, Karen, fell into a deep depression after the divorce. She had been a stay-at-home mom and suddenly needed to support 2 children on her own. She took on multiple jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night, often leaving me to care for Samuel. At 12, I learned to cook simple meals, help with homework, and tuck my brother into bed with made-up stories when he missed our parents. "Why doesn't Dad want to see us anymore, Lainey?" Samuel would ask, using his special nickname for me that no one else was allowed to use. "He does, Sammy. He's just busy." I'd lie stroking his hair until he fell asleep, swallowing my own hurt and anger to be strong for him. By the time I was 16, I had become more parent than sister to Samuel. I worked part-time after school at a local bakery, using my earnings to buy Samuel new shoes when he outgrew his old ones, or the special calculator he needed for math class that Mom couldn't afford. I made sure he joined the soccer team he loved, secretly paying the registration fees and driving him to practices in Mom's old car when she was working. Throughout high school, I maintained excellent grades while juggling my family responsibilities. I had dreams of attending Boston University to study business and had even secured a partial scholarship. But during my senior year, Samuel, then a freshman, was struggling. Our mother's depression had worsened after she injured her back at work, and our father's child support payments were chronically late. The night before I needed to submit my college deposit, I sat at our kitchen table staring at my savings account balance. I had just enough for my first semester's tuition and books, the result of 4 years of saving every penny from my bakery job and summer work. But Samuel needed braces that our insurance wouldn't fully cover, and Mom's medication wasn't working, meaning another expensive doctor's appointment. I made my decision that night. I would attend community college instead, continue working, and save the rest of my money for our family's needs. When I told Samuel years later about this choice, he cried and apologized, but I never regretted it. His health and happiness were worth more than any college experience. For 2 years, I attended classes at the local community college while working full-time at an upscale catering company. I discovered I had a talent for organization and an eye for detail that made me valuable in event planning. By the time I earned my associate's degree, I had been promoted to assistant event coordinator. Meanwhile, Samuel was thriving in high school. He joined the debate team, maintained a 4.0 GPA, and set his sights on attending Northeastern University to study engineering. When he was accepted with a partial scholarship, I felt a pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. But the scholarship wouldn't cover everything, and our parents couldn't help much. "I can just go to community college like you did, Lainey," he said when we reviewed the numbers. It's not a big deal. Absolutely not, I insisted. You're going to Northeastern. We'll figure it out. And we did. I took on additional events at work, often planning weddings and corporate parties back to back on weekends. I moved into a tiny studio apartment to save on rent and continued putting money aside for Samuel's education. Our mother had finally found a stable job with health benefits, which helped, but the bulk of Samuel's college expenses fell to me. During those 4 years, I built a reputation as one of the most reliable event planners in Boston. Clients began specifically requesting me, and I used this leverage to negotiate a better commission structure. By the time Samuel graduated with his engineering degree, I had saved enough to start my own small event planning business specializing in weddings and milestone celebrations. The day Samuel received his diploma, I sat in the audience next to our mother, who was having one of her good days, and even our father had shown up, though he left immediately after the ceremony. I couldn't stop the tears as I watched my little brother cross that stage, tall and confident, his future bright with possibilities. Everything I had sacrificed had been worth it for this moment. After graduation, Samuel secured a job at a respectable engineering firm in Boston. He insisted on taking me out to dinner with his first paycheck. "To the best sister in the world," he toasted, raising his glass. "I wouldn't be here without you, Lainey." Literally. We established a tradition of weekly Sunday dinners after that, regardless of how busy either of us became. Sometimes we'd try new restaurants, other times I'd cook at my place, or he at his. These dinners were sacred to us, a time to maintain our bond despite our increasingly independent adult lives. Samuel was there for me too, especially when my 3-year relationship with Christopher ended abruptly after I discovered he'd been cheating. Samuel showed up at my apartment with ice cream and stayed all night letting me cry and rant until I had no tears left. He helped me move out of the place Christopher and I had shared, and even confronted him when we ran into my ex at a local coffee shop. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements and occasionally went weeks without seeing each other due to work commitments or minor squabbles, but we always found our way back to each other. We were more than siblings. We were each other's constants in a world that had often felt unstable. That's why when Samuel first introduced me to Cynthia 2 years ago, I was eager to welcome her into our small but mighty family circle. I never imagined she would be the one to finally break the bond I thought was unbreakable. I'll never forget the night I first met Cynthia. Samuel had been dating her for about a month and was practically bursting with excitement to introduce us. He'd chosen our favorite Italian restaurant, a cozy family-owned place where we'd celebrated countless occasions over the years. "She's amazing, Lainey," he gushed on the phone before our dinner. "Smart, beautiful, ambitious. You're going to love her." I arrived early, wanting to make a good impression. Samuel had dated several women over the years, but none had inspired this level of enthusiasm. As I waited at our table sipping a glass of Chianti, I saw them enter. Samuel was beaming his hand protectively at the small of the back of a strikingly beautiful woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an outfit that looked straight out of a fashion magazine. My first impression of Cynthia was positive. She was indeed beautiful, with a dazzling smile and an elegant presence that commanded attention. She greeted me with a firm handshake and maintained eye contact, signs of confidence I appreciated. "I've heard so much about you," she said warmly. "Samuel speaks of you like you hung the moon." During dinner, Cynthia shared stories about her job as a marketing executive at a prestigious firm, her extensive travels, and her upbringing in an affluent Boston suburb. She was charming, witty, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Samuel watched her with undisguised adoration, and I was happy to see him so smitten. Looking back, there were subtle warning signs even then. When I mentioned my event planning business, a fleeting expression crossed Cynthia's face, something between amusement and dismissal, before she politely asked a few surface-level questions and quickly redirected the conversation to her recent project for a luxury car brand. As dinner progressed, I noticed she frequently name-dropped prestigious places and people. "When I was skiing in Gstaad last winter," or "my friend who works for Vogue always says," These comments were often paired with quick glances to gauge our reactions, as if measuring whether we were sufficiently impressed. Still, I was willing to overlook these small things. Samuel was happier than I'd seen him in years, and that was what mattered most to me. Over the next few months, however, the red flags became harder to ignore. Samuel and I had maintained our Sunday dinner tradition for years, but now he began canceling more frequently, always with Cynthia-related excuses. She surprised me with theater tickets, or her parents are in town unexpectedly. I understood that new relationships required time and adjustment, but the pattern was concerning. When we did manage to have our dinners, Samuel would spend much of the time checking his phone, responding to Cynthia's texts, with an urgency that suggested consequences if he delayed. Then came the Thanksgiving incident. Our mother had been planning our small family Thanksgiving for weeks, excited to host Samuel and me in her newly renovated kitchen. 2 days before the holiday, Samuel called with news that shattered our plans. Cynthia's parents have invited us to their country club for Thanksgiving. He said, his voice a mixture of excitement and guilt. It's a really big deal, Lainey. All their family friends will be there, and her father wants to introduce me to some engineering contacts. But Mom has been planning this for weeks, I protested. She bought all the food already. I know, and I feel terrible, he sighed. But this is important for my future with Cynthia. Can't I at least come to the country club too? I asked, thinking of our mother spending Thanksgiving alone. Actually, it's members and their guests only. Very exclusive, he explained awkwardly. Cynthia could only bring one guest. I later discovered this was a lie. Several non-member families had attended as guests. Cynthia had simply not wanted me there. As their relationship progressed, Cynthia's true attitude toward me became increasingly apparent. Her comments about my appearance began as seemingly helpful suggestions. Have you ever thought about highlights? They would brighten up your face? Or, that outfit is nice, but have you seen the new collection at Nordstrom? So much more current. These evolved into more pointed critiques. Event planning must be so stressful. It shows in your complexion. Or, I'm surprised you haven't upgraded your car yet with all the weddings you plan. Each time Samuel witnessed these interactions, he would either change the subject or laugh uncomfortably, but never defend me. It was as if he couldn't or wouldn't see the subtle digs for what they were. 6 months into their relationship, I finally met Cynthia's parents at a dinner she organized at an exclusive restaurant downtown. Norman and Ruth Hamilton arrived dressed impeccably, their expressions cool and assessing as they shook my hand with the barest politeness before warmly embracing their daughter. Throughout dinner, their questions to Samuel felt more like an interrogation than genuine interest. And your father is in accounting, you said. At which firm? Or, your undergraduate degree is from Northeastern. Did you consider any Ivy League schools? Their disappointment was poorly concealed when they learned about our modest family background. Ruth actually winced when Samuel mentioned our mother's job as an administrative assistant. Cynthia jumped in quickly to emphasize Samuel's current success and promising career trajectory as if to compensate for his apparently inadequate origins. When the conversation turned to me, Cynthia smoothly interjected before I could fully explain my business. Elaine helps organize parties, she said, reducing my career to a hobby. She's very creative with limited budgets. The condescension was unmistakable, but I maintained my composure, focusing on Samuel's happiness rather than my wounded pride. After 10 months of dating, Samuel announced they were engaged. He called me immediately after proposing, his voice bubbling with excitement. She said, "Yes, Lainey. We're thinking about a spring wedding, maybe at the Harbor Hotel. Nothing too big, but nice." I swallowed my concerns and congratulated him sincerely. If Cynthia was his choice, I would support him and try harder to build a relationship with my future sister-in-law. That resolution was tested almost immediately when Cynthia began excluding me from wedding planning activities that would typically involve the groom's sister. She created a wedding planning committee that included her mother, 3 bridesmaids, and even Samuel's boss's wife, but not me, when I offered to help. Given my professional experience, Cynthia smiled tightly. "That's sweet, but we've hired the best wedding planner in Boston. Madeline Porter. Perhaps you've heard of her. I had indeed heard of Madeline. We had collaborated on events before, but Cynthia's implication was clear. My business wasn't prestigious enough to be associated with her wedding. Despite everything, I still loved my brother and wanted his day to be perfect. I just never imagined how costly that desire would become both financially and emotionally. The real wedding drama began 3 months after their engagement, when Samuel called me clearly distressed. We met at a quiet cafe near my apartment, and he looked uncharacteristically disheveled with dark circles under his eyes. "Lainey, I don't know what to do," he confessed after ordering a strong black coffee. "The wedding is getting out of control." As he explained, Cynthia's initial vision of a nice wedding at the Harbor Hotel had evolved dramatically. Now she wanted the prestigious Wentworth estate, a historic mansion with gardens overlooking the ocean, with a minimum $50,000 rental fee alone. She'd selected a designer gown that cost more than Samuel's annual salary, insisted on flying in a specific photographer from New York, and was planning a 7-course dinner with imported champagne. Her parents promised to contribute, but they're suddenly saying they can only cover the rehearsal dinner, Samuel explained, running his hands through his hair. "My savings are nearly wiped out from the engagement ring, and we're not even close to covering half of what she wants." I watched my brother's desperation and made a decision I would later question many times. "What if I helped?" I suggested carefully. "My business has been doing well, and I have connections with vendors who might offer discounts." Samuel's expression was a mixture of hope and embarrassment. "Lainey, I can't ask you to do that. You've already done so much for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering," I insisted. "Let me do this for you. Consider it my wedding gift." We worked out an arrangement I would finance the majority of the wedding through my company negotiating with vendors I had relationships with. To maintain Cynthia's vision of a prestigious event, we agreed to keep my financial involvement private. As far as Cynthia and her family would know, Samuel had figured out the finances with only minor assistance from me. "There's one condition," I said. "Since it's going through my business, I'll need to be the official client on the contracts. It's for liability reasons, but don't worry. You and Cynthia will make all the decisions." Samuel agreed readily, too relieved to question the arrangement. I didn't tell him that my condition was also to protect myself. Something in my gut warned me to maintain some control over the situation. When planning began in earnest, the true extent of Cynthia's extravagance became clear. Nothing was too expensive or exclusive. She demanded handcrafted invitations with real gold leaf, insisted on rare out-of-season flowers, and rejected 3 different cake designs before approving one that required a pastry chef to work for a week on sugar sculptures. I worked overtime on other events to generate the extra income needed, often staying up until 2 a.m., answering emails and coordinating details for multiple clients. My assistant Harold became concerned about my exhaustion, but I brushed off his worries. This was for Samuel, I reminded myself, for his happiness. Despite my role in financing the wedding, Cynthia systematically excluded me from planning sessions. She would schedule meetings with vendors when she knew I had other commitments, then inform me afterward about decisions that added thousands to the budget. When I suggested more cost-effective alternatives, she dismissed them as budget options that would embarrass her in front of her society friends. "Cynthia, the garden roses are just as beautiful as the imported peonies, and they're a third of the price," I suggested during one rare planning meeting I managed to attend. "If you can't see the difference, that's precisely why I need to make these decisions," she replied with a condescending smile. "My guests have certain expectations." Samuel sat silently during these exchanges, occasionally giving me apologetic glances, but never contradicting his fiancée. The bridesmaid exclusion was perhaps the most personal slight. I had assumed, given our close relationship and my significant contribution to the wedding, that I would be included in the bridal party. Instead, Samuel awkwardly informed me that Cynthia had chosen her 3 college friends and her cousin as bridesmaids. "She says having sisters-in-law as bridesmaids is outdated," he explained uncomfortably, "and she already had her heart set on these 4 friends." I nodded and pretended it didn't hurt. But the message was clear: I was an outsider, tolerated but not embraced. As the wedding date approached, I discovered another troubling detail. While reviewing payments, I realized that despite Cynthia's claims about her parents contributing to various aspects of the wedding, every major expense had been covered through my company's accounts. When I carefully broached the subject with Samuel, he became defensive. "Her parents are handling the honeymoon and some other things," he insisted vaguely. "Cynthia has it all organized." Later investigation revealed that even the honeymoon had been booked on Samuel's credit card, maxing it out completely. The other things Cynthia's parents were supposedly covering never materialized. Throughout this period, my relationship with Samuel deteriorated noticeably. Our weekly dinners had dwindled to monthly brief coffees during which he seemed distracted and eager to leave. When I mentioned missing our time together, he accused me of not supporting his relationship. "Cynthia says you're trying to keep me tied to our childhood instead of embracing my future," he said during one tense conversation. "Maybe she's right. Maybe you need to let go a little, Lainey." His words stung like a physical slap. After everything we'd been through together, after all I was sacrificing for his wedding, he was pushing me away based on Cynthia's manipulations. Still, I persisted. I told myself that once they were married, things would settle down. Cynthia's bridezilla behavior would subside, and my brother would remember our bond. I continued writing checks and making arrangements, determined to give Samuel the perfect day, even as I felt him slipping further from me. The rehearsal dinner, ironically, was the one event Cynthia's parents actually did host. It was scheduled for the evening before the wedding at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. Despite my growing anxiety about the following day, I dressed carefully in an elegant navy dress and arrived precisely on time, determined to maintain a positive attitude. I had no idea that evening would change everything. The rehearsal dinner venue was stunning, a private room in one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor lights. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over impeccably set tables, adorned with elaborate floral arrangements and custom place cards. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated event the Hamiltons wanted people to associate with their family. As I entered, Norman and Ruth Hamilton were greeting guests near the door, Ruth resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She air-kissed the cheeks of arriving guests and offered me only the briefest acknowledgement, a tight smile and nod, before turning her attention to someone more important behind me. The seating arrangement immediately made clear my position in the hierarchy. Despite being the groom's only sibling, I was placed at a far table with distant acquaintances and workplace associates, nowhere near the family table where Samuel sat with Cynthia and her parents. Even our mother had been seated at a different table, separated from both Samuel and me. I noticed Cynthia holding court at the center table, radiant in a white cocktail dress, laughing with her bridesmaids. When our eyes briefly met across the room, her smile faltered for just a moment before she pointedly turned away, whispering something to the blonde bridesmaid beside her that caused them both to glance in my direction and giggle. During the first course, I overheard snippets of conversation from the people at my table, mostly Cynthia's father's business associates, who had no connection to either the bride or groom. "Do you know the bride or groom?" a middle-aged man across from me asked politely. "I'm the groom's sister," I replied. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really, I would have expected you to be seated with the family." I smiled tightly and changed the subject, unwilling to create drama the night before my brother's wedding. Midway through dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I rounded the corner to the ladies' room, I heard familiar voices from a small alcove, Cynthia and two of her bridesmaids. "Can you believe her dress so department store?" Cynthia was saying. "And she calls herself an event planner." "Well, she does those little backyard parties, right?" one bridesmaid replied with a snicker. "God, she's always hovering around Samuel like a helicopter parent. It's pathetic, really. Thank goodness he's finally breaking free from her control." I froze, the words hitting me like physical blows. Part of me wanted to confront them, But another part, the part that had spent a lifetime keeping peace for Samuel's sake, held me back. I slipped into the restroom unnoticed, locking myself in a stall until I could compose myself. When I returned to the dining room, the speeches were beginning. Ruth Hamilton spoke first, raising her champagne flute to toast the couple. "To Cynthia and Samuel," she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old Boston money. "Two remarkable young people beginning a journey together. Samuel, we are delighted to welcome you into our family despite your humble beginnings. It's clear you aspire to greater things." The condescension was thinly veiled, but guests politely applauded. Norman followed with a speech that was essentially a recitation of his daughter's accomplishments and their family's social standing. Then each bridesmaid offered anecdotes about Cynthia's perfection. When Samuel spoke, I barely recognized my brother. His speech was stiff and formal, nothing like his usual warm, genuine communication style. He thanked the Hamiltons for guiding him toward the proper social circles and expressed gratitude to Cynthia for elevating his aspirations. Not once did he mention our mother or me. After the formal speeches, Ruth Hamilton clinked her glass for attention. "We'd like to thank everyone who contributed to making this wedding weekend spectacular," she announced. She proceeded to acknowledge the wedding planner, the venue coordinator, even the florist, but not once mentioned my name or contribution, despite the fact that my company was listed on every vendor contract and I had personally coordinated most details. The omission was so blatant that several industry professionals who knew of my involvement exchanged confused glances. Harold, my assistant who was attending as my +1, squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. As dessert was served, I decided to make one last attempt to connect with my brother. I approached the main table during a moment when Cynthia was occupied with her bridesmaids. "Samuel, could we talk for a minute?" I asked quietly. He looked up, momentarily startled, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Oh, Lainey. Now's not really a good time. Maybe after dessert." "It'll just take a second," I persisted. Reluctantly, he rose and followed me to a quiet corner. "What's up? Is something wrong with the arrangements for tomorrow?" "No, everything's set," I assured him. I miss you, Sammy. We've barely talked in months. Are you happy? Really happy?" Something flickered in his eyes, a moment of the brother I knew, but before he could respond, Cynthia materialized beside us, slipping her arm possessively through his. "There you are, darling. My father wants to introduce you to the Stevensons. They're very influential in the engineering world." She turned to me with a cold smile. "Mind if I steal him away, family business?" The pointed emphasis on family excluding me was unmistakable. Actually, Cynthia, Elaine, and I were in the middle of a conversation, Samuel said, showing a small spark of independence that surprised me. Cynthia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "The Stevensons are leaving soon, and they're potential contacts for that promotion you want. Surely Elaine understands priorities." She turned to me. "Don't you, Elaine?" Before I could respond, Cynthia's expression shifted to something more openly hostile. "Though I'm not sure you do understand priorities. You've been clinging to Samuel, undermining our relationship from the beginning. Always calling, always needing something, always reminding him of your sacrifices." "Cynthia, that's not fair," Samuel protested weakly. "It's completely fair," she snapped, dropping all pretense of politeness. "Your sister has been trying to sabotage us from day one because she can't stand not being the center of your world anymore." Other guests were beginning to notice the confrontation, heads turning our way. I kept my voice low, trying to diffuse the situation. "That's not true. I just want Samuel to be happy." "No, you want Samuel to need you," Cynthia retorted, her voice rising. "You've made him dependent on you, and you can't stand that he's finally breaking free. You've been jealous of me from the moment we met." "Cynthia, please," Samuel murmured, looking uncomfortable with the public scene. She ignored him, stepping closer to me. "Let me make something perfectly clear. After tomorrow, things will be different. Samuel will be part of my family, a real family, not your sad little substitute. You need to back off and find your own life." I stood speechless, watching my brother for some defense, some acknowledgement of our bond, but he remained silent, eyes downcast. Cynthia delivered her final blow, speaking loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "You've always been jealous of us. You don't belong here. This wedding is about our future, not your pathetic need to play martyr." The room had grown quiet, dozens of eyes watching the drama unfold. I felt a burning humiliation rising from my chest to my face, but years of professional composure kept me from breaking down. "Samuel," I said quietly, giving him one last chance to stand up for me, for our relationship. He looked at me, then at Cynthia, then down at his shoes. "Maybe this isn't the best time, Lainey," he mumbled. "We can talk after the wedding." In that moment, something broke inside me. After all the years, all the sacrifices, all the love I had poured into my brother, he couldn't even defend me from public humiliation. I looked directly at Cynthia, then at my brother, and nodded once. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Congratulations on your wedding." With that, I turned and walked calmly through the restaurant, past the curious stares and whispered comments, out into the cool night air. Only when I reached my car did I allow the tears to fall hot and fast down my cheeks. As I drove home, my sadness gradually transformed into something else, a clear, cold resolve. I had given everything to ensure Samuel's happiness, and this was how he repaid me. Cynthia had made her position crystal clear. I didn't belong in their life. Perhaps it was time I took her at her word. By the time I arrived home, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The drive home from the rehearsal dinner was a blur of city lights and tears. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind raced with the evening's humiliation playing on repeat. By the time I parked outside my apartment building, a strange calm had replaced my initial shock and pain. Inside, I kicked off my heels and went straight to my home office. I opened my laptop and pulled up the wedding folder, which contained every contract, every payment record, every email related to Samuel and Cynthia's wedding. The evidence of my generosity and their ingratitude was meticulously organized in subfolders. I poured myself a glass of wine and began reviewing the documents one by one. The venue contract for the Wentworth estate, $62,000. Paid in full through my company account. The catering agreement for 175 guests, 38 us. $500 with my signature on the dotted line. The floral arrangements, the photographer, the band, the lighting specialists, every single service had been secured through my business relationships and paid for with my money. The grand total made me wince, $147,000. Far more than I had initially budgeted and representing most of my business's profit for the year. I had justified each expense as an investment in my brother's happiness, but now those numbers represented something else, the price tag of my own humiliation. As I scrolled through the contracts, one critical detail stood out on every document. As the paying client, I was the only person authorized to make changes to the arrangements. The vendors had been instructed to take direction from Cynthia regarding creative decisions, but contractually they answered to me. I sat back in my chair taking a long sip of wine as the realization of my power in this situation dawned on me. For months I had been a doormat, allowing Cynthia to trample over me while financing her dream wedding. But I wasn't powerless. Far from it. Still, I hesitated. Was I really considering sabotaging my own brother's wedding? The thought made my stomach twist with guilt. This wasn't just about Cynthia. It would affect Samuel, too. The brother I had practically raised, the person I had sacrificed so much for. But then I remembered his silence during Cynthia's tirade. How he had stood there, eyes downcast, while she publicly humiliated me. How he had been systematically pulling away for months, dismissing our bond as something childish to outgrow, rather than the profound connection that had sustained us both. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Harold's number. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "Elaine, is everything okay? You left the dinner so suddenly. I need your help," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Can you come over first thing tomorrow morning and bring the vendor contact list for the Lewis Hamilton wedding? There was a pause. What's going on, Elaine? I'll explain tomorrow. Just tell me you can be here by 7. Another pause. I'll be there. I spent the next hour meticulously reviewing every contract, noting cancellation policies and contact information. Most vendors required 48 hours notice for cancellations, but as the wedding was the next day, we were well past that window. This meant I would forfeit deposits, in many cases substantial ones, but at this point the financial loss seemed insignificant compared to the emotional toll. I created a spreadsheet with 3-column services that could be completely canceled, services that could be modified, and services that should remain untouched. In the last category, I included only the venue itself. The Wentworth estate would still be available, but it would be an empty shell, no flowers, no food, no music, no photographer to document the disaster. Was it petty? Absolutely. Financially self-destructive? Probably. But as I thought of Cynthia's cruel words, "You don't belong here," and Samuel's damning silence, something hardened within me. Some lessons could only be taught through consequences. At 7 the next morning, Harold arrived at my apartment looking concerned. I had barely slept, but adrenaline kept me focused as I explained what had happened at the rehearsal dinner and outlined my plan. "Are you sure about this?" Harold asked when I finished. "It's not just Cynthia you're punishing, it's Samuel too, and your company's reputation could take a hit." "I know," I admitted. "But this isn't a snap decision based on one bad night. This is about months, years really, of being taken for granted, used, and discarded. Sometimes a clean break is the only way forward." Harold nodded slowly. "I've watched how they've treated you throughout this process. It's been difficult to witness." He picked up the vendor contact list. "Where do we start?" We began with the catering company. I called Antonio, the owner, with whom I had worked on dozens of successful events. "Elaine, buongiorno. All is ready for the big day. My team will arrive at the venue at 2 o'clock. Actually, Antonio, that's why I'm calling. I need to cancel the catering services for today." There was a pause. "Cancel, but the wedding is today. We have prepared much of the food already." "I understand, and I'll pay for all costs incurred, plus the cancellation fee as per our contract. This is a personal matter, but I need your discretion and cooperation." Antonio had known me for years and recognized the resolve in my voice. "If you are sure, but what will the guests eat?" "That's not my concern anymore," I said, feeling a flicker of guilt that I quickly suppressed. "Please have your team stand down. I'll handle the financial details next week." One by one, Harold and I contacted every vendor. The florist who had ordered $12,000 worth of out-of-season peonies, the band that charged $9,000 for a 4-hour reception, the lighting specialist, the cake designer, the videographer, each call following the same pattern. Initial shock concern about the last-minute cancellation, and finally reluctant acceptance when I assured them I would honor all financial penalties. The photographer Marcos was particularly difficult. "This will create a 3-day hole in my schedule that I cannot fill," he protested. "And the couple will have no wedding photos." "I understand your concern about the scheduling," I replied calmly. "I'll pay the full amount we agreed upon, not just the cancellation fee. As for the couple's photos, that's no longer my responsibility." By 9 o'clock, we had systematically dismantled every aspect of the wedding except the venue itself. I had instructed Linda, the Wentworth estate manager, to allow access to the property as planned, but to inform the wedding party upon arrival that all vendors had been canceled by the client of record. "This is highly unusual," Linda said, her voice reflecting her professional discomfort. "May I ask what's happening?" The short version: the bride made it clear I'm not welcome at an event I paid for entirely. I'm respecting her wishes by removing myself and, by extension, my financial support from the equation. Linda's tone softened slightly. "I've managed weddings for 15 years. and I've seen how brides can treat their partners' families. I'll handle this as discreetly as possible." The last call was to Madeline Porter, the prestigious wedding planner Cynthia had insisted on hiring and whom I had paid for. She was predictably outraged. "This is completely unprofessional," she exclaimed. "I have never experienced such a situation in 20 years of planning high-profile events. I find it unprofessional that you've taken credit for arrangements my company facilitated and paid for," I countered. "But that's beside the point now. The vendors have been notified. Your services are no longer required." After completing the calls, I sent a single email to Cynthia's parents with the subject line, "Wedding Financial Update." It was brief and to the point, "Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton." This email serves as formal notification that all vendor services previously arranged for Samuel and Cynthia's wedding have been canceled. The venue remains available as reserved. As the client of record who has paid all expenses to date, this decision is within my contractual rights. Perhaps you can now provide the financial support you claim to be contributing all along. Regards, Elaine Matthews, Vent Design. I then turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and took a deep breath. The deed was done. In approximately 4 hours, Samuel, Cynthia, and their guests would arrive at a beautiful empty venue with no food, no flowers, no music, and no one to document their reactions. "What now?" Harold asked quietly. "Now we wait," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of guilt, vindication, and grief. "And maybe start looking for a new career, because after this my reputation in the Boston wedding industry might be irreparably damaged." Harold shook his head. "Don't be so sure. Most of these vendors have worked with you for years. They've seen how professional and generous you are, and they've also seen how the bride has treated you throughout this process. Word gets around." I managed a small smile. "Let's hope you're right. Either way, I couldn't continue being used and disrespected. Not for another day." As Harold left, promising to check in later, I curled up on my couch, emotionally exhausted. The magnitude of what I'd done was starting to sink in. I had potentially destroyed my relationship with my brother forever. I had certainly created a scandal that would ripple through Boston's social circles. I had risked my business reputation and forfeited a small fortune in non-refundable deposits. Yet beneath the guilt and anxiety, I felt something else, a sense of having finally stood up for myself after a lifetime of putting others first. Cynthia had declared I didn't belong in their world. I had simply taken her at her word and removed myself along with everything my presence had provided. The wedding was scheduled for 3 o'clock. At precisely 3:15, I poured myself another glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to the chaos I imagined was unfolding at the Wentworth estate. "To boundaries," I whispered to my empty apartment. "Long overdue." I woke the next morning with a strange mixture of dread and relief. The deed was done and there was no going back. I had turned off my phone the previous evening, unwilling to face the inevitable barrage of calls and messages that would come once the wedding disaster unfolded. Now, taking a deep breath, I powered it back on. The screen immediately lit up with notifications. 17 missed calls from Samuel. 23 from an unknown number I assumed was Cynthia. 5 voicemails. 38 text messages. 3 emails with "emergency" in the subject line. I started with the first voicemail, which had come in around 3:30 p.m. the previous day, just when the ceremony should have been starting. "Elaine, what the hell is going on?" Cynthia's voice was shrill with panic and rage. "We just got to Wentworth and they're saying all the vendors have been canceled. Call me back right now, or I swear to God I will sue you for everything you have." The second voicemail from Samuel 10 minutes later broke my heart a little despite my resolve. "Lainey, please, I don't understand what's happening. Everyone's saying you canceled everything. There's no food, no flowers, nothing. Please call me back. Please." The third was from Norman Hamilton, his aristocratic voice barely containing his fury. "Ms. Matthews, this is Norman Hamilton. Your childish stunt has embarrassed our family in front of our entire social circle. Expect to hear from our attorneys first thing Monday morning." The text messages followed a similar pattern, evolving from confusion to panic to rage. The final one from Samuel, sent at midnight, was different in tone. "I know what Cynthia said was terrible. I should have defended you. But this destroying our wedding, I never thought you could be so cruel. I don't even know who you are anymore." His words stung, but they also reinforced that I had made the right decision. Even now, Samuel was placing the blame entirely on me with no acknowledgement of how he and Cynthia had treated me for months. I decided to visit my mother, who had been scheduled to attend the wedding despite being seated at a back table far from the family. I hadn't told her about my plans to cancel everything, and I dreaded her reaction. Karen Matthews had always advocated for peace and family harmony, often to her own detriment. When I arrived at her small but cozy apartment, she opened the door with a knowing look. "I wondered when you'd show up," she said, ushering me inside. "You've created quite the scandal." "You heard what happened?" I asked, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Hard not to," she replied, settling into her favorite armchair. "Samuel called me in a panic yesterday afternoon. Then again, at midnight, half drunk and devastated." I winced. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have warned you, but I was afraid you'd try to talk me out of it." "I probably would have," she admitted, "but that doesn't mean you were wrong to do it." Her response surprised me. "You're not angry." Mom took a thoughtful sip of her coffee. "Elaine, I've watched you sacrifice for your brother since you were 12 years old. You gave up your college dreams for him. You worked yourself to exhaustion to put him through school. You've been his safety net, his cheerleader, his constant support. And I've seen how Cynthia has treated you, how she's driven a wedge between you two." She reached over and took my hand. Was canceling their wedding dramatic and possibly destructive? Yes. But sometimes when people refuse to hear you speaking softly, you have to shout to be heard. Tears welled in my eyes at her unexpected support. "I was so afraid you'd be disappointed in me." "Oh, honey," she said gently. "I'm sad about the situation, but I understand why you did it. That girl publicly humiliated you after you'd spent a fortune on her wedding. And Samuel just stood there and let it happen. There are consequences to treating people that way, especially people who love you as much as you love your brother." As we talked, my phone continued to buzz with incoming calls and messages, which I continued to ignore. Instead, I asked about what had happened at the venue. Mom's account, pieced together from what Samuel had told her and what she'd witnessed herself, painted a vivid picture of the chaos. Guests had arrived to find a beautiful but empty venue, no chairs set up for the ceremony, no floral arrangements, no string quartet playing softly as they entered. The wedding planner had been frantically calling vendors, only to be told they had been officially canceled by the client of record. Cynthia had apparently had a complete meltdown, screaming at venue staff and collapsing in tears in the bridal suite. Her parents had tried to salvage the situation by calling local caterers for emergency service, but no one could accommodate a 175-person event on zero notice. Guests had milled about in confusion before most eventually left, while the wedding party remained in a state of shock and disarray. "Samuel tried to reach you dozens of times," Mom said. "When he couldn't get through, he finally told everyone the truth, that you had paid for the entire wedding and apparently canceled everything after what happened at the rehearsal dinner." I felt a twinge of satisfaction that the truth had come out. Cynthia and her parents had been exposed for their false claims about contributing financially, and the guests now knew exactly why the wedding had fallen apart. Around noon, my phone rang again, this time with a number I recognized. It was Louis, a family friend who had attended the wedding. I decided to answer. "Elaine, thank God you picked up," he said. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday." "Hi, Louis. I'm guessing you're calling about the wedding." "Or lack thereof," he replied. "It was the most bizarre thing I've ever witnessed. One minute we're all dressed up waiting for a ceremony to start. The next minute the mother of the bride is having a conniption fit, and the father is threatening to sue everyone in sight. I heard it was quite a scene, I said neutrally. Scene doesn't begin to cover it, Lewis continued. When Samuel finally admitted you had paid for everything and why you had canceled it, Cynthia completely lost it. Started screaming about how you had always been trying to control Samuel, how you were pathologically jealous of her. But the way she was acting, let's just say it didn't help her case. He paused. A lot of people were asking what happened at the rehearsal dinner to trigger this. Word got around about how Cynthia had treated you. The tide of opinion isn't flowing in her direction, if you know what I mean. This was small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. At least people knew I hadn't acted without severe provocation. And Samuel? I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Lewis sighed. Devastated, confused, angry. But also, I don't know, Elaine. When he was explaining what happened, telling people how you had secretly paid for everything while Cynthia treated you like dirt, I think he was finally hearing how it sounded. Sometimes you don't realize how messed up a situation is until you have to describe it to others. After speaking with Lewis, I checked social media, bracing myself for the inevitable fallout. Sure enough, the wedding disaster had created ripples through Boston's social circles. Several guests had posted vague references to wedding drama and family betrayal, though thankfully without specific details. Cynthia's bridesmaid, Melissa, however, had posted a scathing rant about psychotic family members ruining what should have been the perfect day, tagging Cynthia and including the hashtag #weddingfromhell. The comments section had quickly devolved into a debate with several people defending me after hearing the full story. By evening, I felt emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. I had taken action after years really of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The financial cost was significant, and the relational damage might be irreparable, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, I had stood up for myself. As I prepared for bed, my doorbell rang. My heart jumped to my throat. Who would be visiting at this hour? Through the peephole, I saw Samuel standing in the hallway looking disheveled and exhausted. I hesitated, then slowly opened the door. We stood facing each other in silence for a long moment, years of shared history and recent pain hanging between us like a tangible thing. "Can I come in?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside to let him enter, closing the door behind him. Whatever happened next would determine if our relationship could be salvaged or if yesterday's wedding disaster had been its final chapter. Samuel stood awkwardly in my living room, looking around as if he'd never seen the place before, though he'd visited countless times. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from either tears or lack of sleep, probably both. He wore jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, a far cry from the tuxedo he should have been wearing as a newlywed. "Do you want something to drink?" I asked, defaulting to politeness, despite the tension crackling between us. "No, yes, maybe water," he said, running a hand through his hair. I went to the kitchen, grateful for the momentary reprieve to collect my thoughts. When I returned with 2 glasses of water, Samuel had sunk onto my couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I placed his glass on the coffee table and sat in the armchair across from him, maintaining a deliberate distance. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the wall clock seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Why Lainey?" he finally asked, looking up at me with an expression of genuine bewilderment. "How could you do that to me?" The question ignited a spark of anger I thought I had exhausted. How could you stand there while Cynthia humiliated me in front of everyone? How could you let her treat me like garbage for months while I bankrupted myself to give you the wedding of her dreams? She was stressed about the wedding. I cut him off. "Don't make excuses for her. Not anymore." Samuel fell silent, then nodded slowly. "You're right. I shouldn't defend what she said. It was cruel and unfair. It wasn't just what she said at the rehearsal dinner, Samuel. It was everything leading up to it. The constant exclusion, the condescension, the lies about her parents contributing when I was covering everything. And worst of all, watching you slowly turn into someone I didn't recognize, Someone who would choose a woman who treated your family like that. He winced at my words. I know I've been different since meeting Cynthia, but I loved her, Lainey. I wanted to build a life with her, even if that meant destroying your relationship with me with Mom. Samuel looked down at his hands. I didn't see it that way. I thought once we were married, things would settle down. Cynthia would relax and we'd all find a way to get along. I laughed without humor. Is that what you told yourself, that her behavior was temporary? That the woman who called your mother's job menial and who told me I didn't belong in your life would suddenly embrace us after the wedding? I don't know what I was thinking, he admitted quietly. Maybe I didn't want to see the reality because it would mean making a choice I wasn't ready to make. We sat in silence again, the weight of his words settling between us. Outside, rain had started to fall, pattering against the windows in a gentle rhythm. After you left the rehearsal dinner, Samuel continued, Cynthia acted like nothing had happened, just went back to laughing with her bridesmaids. But I couldn't stop thinking about the look on your face when I failed to defend you. He took a shaky breath. I knew I'd messed up, but I told myself I'd make it right after the wedding. And then there was no wedding, I said softly. And then there was no wedding, he echoed. When we arrived at the venue and found out everything had been canceled, I've never seen Cynthia like that. She was screaming, throwing things, threatening to sue everyone in sight. At first, I was in shock, trying to understand what had happened. Then the venue manager explained that all services had been canceled by the client of Record U. I nodded but said nothing. I was angry, devastated, humiliated, Samuel continued. But when I had to explain to everyone why you might have done this, when I had to say out loud that you had paid for everything while being treated like an unwelcome outsider, something clicked. I started hearing how it sounded to other people, saw their expressions change from sympathy to understanding. He reached for his water glass, taking a long sip before continuing. Cynthia's reaction made everything worse. Instead of acknowledging any responsibility, she went on a tirade about how you had always been pathologically attached to me, how you were trying to control me. She even accused you of having some kind of unhealthy obsession. He shook his head. The more she ranted, the clearer I could see who she really was. And who is that? I asked. Samuel met my eyes directly for the first time. Someone who sees relationships as transactions, who measures people's worth by their social status or financial utility, who would happily destroy my relationship with my family if it meant getting what she wanted. He paused. Someone I'm ashamed I chose over the sister who has always been there for me. The simple acknowledgement broke something inside me. Tears I had been holding back started flowing freely down my cheeks. I've spent my whole life trying to protect you, support you, help you achieve your dreams, I said through tears. And watching you choose someone who treated me like I was nothing, it broke my heart, Samuel. I know, he whispered, his own eyes filling with tears. I know that now, and I'm so sorry, Lainey. More sorry than I can ever express. What happened with Cynthia? I asked after we had both composed ourselves. Samuel's expression hardened. We're done. After the wedding disaster, we went back to her parents' house. I was still in shock trying to process everything, but Cynthia and her parents immediately started planning how to sue you, how to spin the story to save face socially. Not once did any of them acknowledge how they had treated you or that you had paid for everything. He leaned back on the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. It was like a veil lifted and I could finally see clearly. I told Cynthia I couldn't marry someone who would treat my family that way, who would lie about her parents' financial contribution, who would publicly humiliate the person who had done the most for me throughout my life. How did she take that? I asked, already guessing the answer. About how you'd expect. More screaming accusations, threats. She threw the engagement ring at me, the one I'm still paying off, by the way. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her final words were that I deserved to be stuck with my controlling sister forever. I flinched at the words, but Samuel leaned forward earnestly. But here's the thing, Lainey. She meant it as an insult, but all I could think was how lucky I've been to have you in my life. How you've always put me first, sometimes at great cost to yourself. How I repaid that by letting someone treat you terribly. His voice broke. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I studied my brother's face, the familiar features that had changed from chubby childhood to awkward adolescence to the man before me now. Despite everything, this was Samuel, my little brother, the boy I had practically raised, who had held my hand at our father's second wedding, who had stayed up all night with me after my devastating breakup with Christopher. I'm not blameless in this either, I admitted. I've always tried to take care of you sometimes to an unhealthy degree. I've enabled your dependence on me. And maybe I was threatened by Cynthia because she was replacing me as the most important person in your life. Samuel shook his head. That doesn't excuse how she treated you or how I failed to stand up for you. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But if we're going to heal from this, we both need to acknowledge the patterns that got us here. Does that mean there's a chance? He asked, hope flickering in his eyes. That we can repair our relationship. I considered his question carefully. The hurt was still raw, the betrayal still fresh. But underneath the pain was the foundation of a lifetime of love and shared history. I think so, I said finally. But things need to change, Samuel. We need healthier boundaries. You need to take full responsibility for your choices and your life. And I need to stop trying to control outcomes or shield you from consequences. I want that too, he said earnestly. I want to be the brother you deserve, someone who appreciates everything you've done without taking advantage of your generosity. Someone who stands up for you the way you've always stood up for me. We talked for hours after that, unpacking years of dysfunctional patterns and codependence. We discussed how our parents' divorce and our father's emotional abandonment had shaped our relationship, creating an unhealthy dynamic where I became both sister and surrogate parent to Samuel. We acknowledged how this had set him up to be attracted to controlling personalities like Cynthia, who offered the same certainty and direction I had always provided. It was nearly dawn when Samuel finally left, with a tentative plan to meet for coffee the following week. No promises of instant reconciliation, no pretending the hurt hadn't happened, but a commitment to doing the hard work of rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. As I closed the door behind him, I felt emotionally drained but hopeful. The wedding disaster had been painful and costly, but perhaps it had been necessary, a dramatic intervention that forced us both to confront patterns we might otherwise have continued indefinitely. I slept until noon, waking to find several messages from Harold updating me on the professional fallout. To my surprise, it wasn't nearly as bad as I had feared. Most of my regular vendors had been understanding, even sympathetic, once they heard the full story. Several had offered to waive or reduce cancellation fees given the circumstances. Apparently, Cynthia had made quite an impression on everyone she worked with during the planning process, Harold reported. And not a positive one. Your reputation for professionalism and kindness has earned you a lot of goodwill in the industry. Over the next few weeks, life gradually found a new rhythm. I focused on rebuilding my business finances, taking on several new clients who ironically had heard about the wedding incident through the grapevine and been impressed by my willingness to stand up for myself. Samuel and I met weekly, sometimes just the two of us, occasionally with our mother joining us. Each conversation was a delicate balance of honesty and compassion as we navigated the new boundaries of our relationship. There were difficult moments, times when old patterns reasserted themselves, when the hurt felt fresh again, but we persisted, committed to creating something healthier than what we had before. 3 months after the non-wedding, we had dinner at my apartment to mark a milestone in our healing process. I had cooked Samuel's favorite meal, and he had brought a bottle of wine and a small gift, a framed photo of us as children, arms around each other, grinning at the camera with the innocent joy of kids who didn't yet know how complicated life would become. To new beginnings, Samuel toasted, raising his glass. And to the sister who had the courage to show me who I was becoming before it was too late. I clinked my glass against his. To boundaries, healing, and second chances. As we enjoyed our meal, I realized that the wedding disaster, painful as it had been, had ultimately saved us both. Samuel from a marriage to someone who would have isolated him from his family and manipulated his insecurities. Me from continuing a pattern of self-sacrifice that had become destructive rather than loving. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stop enabling harmful behavior, even when that means short-term pain for everyone involved. It's a lesson I wish I had learned earlier, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. Through this experience, I discovered that true family isn't about blind loyalty or endless sacrifice. It's about honest communication, mutual respect, and the courage to hold each other accountable. Samuel and I are still working on building this healthier relationship, but for the first time in our lives, we're doing it as equals, not as caretaker and dependent, but as two adults who choose to be in each other's lives in a way that supports growth rather than dysfunction. And that despite everything feels like something worth celebrating. 1 year has passed since the wedding that never was, and I'm sitting on the deck of my new house overlooking a small lake outside Boston. The autumn leaves are just beginning to turn, painting the reflection on the water with splashes of gold and crimson. It's peaceful here, a sanctuary I created for myself after realizing how much of my life had been spent creating safe spaces for others while neglecting my own needs. The irony of the wedding disaster is how much good eventually came from it. Like setting a broken bone that had healed incorrectly the first time, the painful reset ultimately led to proper healing for both Samuel and me. In the immediate aftermath, there were difficult weeks of processing boundary setting and rebuilding trust. Samuel attended therapy to work through his issues with dependency and conflict avoidance. I worked with my own therapist to address my controlling tendencies and martyr complex. We gave each other space when needed, but remained committed to repairing our relationship. Cynthia made several attempts to salvage her reputation in the weeks following the canceled wedding. She spread various versions of the story through her social circle, each painting her as the victim of a jealous, unstable, almost sister-in-law. For a while, I worried about the damage to my professional reputation, but the truth has a way of emerging over time. Several guests who had witnessed Cynthia's behavior at the rehearsal dinner came forward with their accounts. Vendors shared stories of her impossible demands and disrespectful treatment. Even one of her bridesmaids eventually reached out to apologize for her role in the drama, admitting that Cynthia had always spoken disparagingly about me behind my back. "She was threatened by your relationship with Samuel from day one," the bridesmaid confided. "She used to say she needed to break his dependence on his sister before she could fully control him." Hearing this confirmed what I had suspected all along, that Cynthia had viewed me not as potential family, but as competition to be eliminated. The knowledge didn't erase the hurt, but it validated my decision to finally stand up for myself. Professionally, my business not only survived, but thrived in unexpected ways. After a brief downturn immediately following the incident, I began attracting a different type of client, people who valued authenticity and genuine connection over social climbing and appearances. I pivoted slightly, specializing in more intimate, meaningful celebrations rather than extravagant displays of wealth. This shift brought me back to what I had always loved most about event planning, creating spaces where genuine human connection could flourish. Samuel's growth over the past year has been remarkable to witness. After the breakup with Cynthia, he took time to reflect on the patterns in his life. He reconnected with old friends who had been sidelined during his relationship, developed new interests, and gradually rebuilt his confidence and independence. 6 months ago, he met Julia, a kind-hearted environmental engineer with a refreshing directness. Unlike Cynthia, Julia made efforts to know me and our mother from the beginning, joining us for family dinners and genuinely listening to our stories. The first time I saw them together, I noticed how Samuel stood taller, spoke more confidently, and seemed completely at ease, so different from the walking on eggshells tension that had characterized his relationship with Cynthia. "What do you think of her?" Samuel asked nervously after Julia left our first dinner together. "I think she sees you," I replied honestly. "The real you, and she likes what she sees." The relief in his smile told me everything. He valued my opinion not out of dependency, but out of respect for my insight. Progress. Our mother Karen has also flourished this past year. With both her children in healthier places emotionally, her own chronic anxiety has decreased significantly. She started taking art classes, something she had always wanted to do but never found time for between work and worry. Seeing her produce beautiful watercolor landscapes has been one of the unexpected joys of this difficult year. Even more surprising was the tentative reconnection with our father Walter. After hearing about the wedding incident through family channels, he reached out to Samuel, then eventually to me. Our first meeting was awkward, laden with years of unaddressed hurt and abandonment. But it opened a door that had been firmly closed for decades. Walter is not suddenly the father we needed as children, nor have I fully forgiven his absence during our formative years. But we're cautiously building a relationship based on who we are now, rather than who we were then. It's a work in progress, much like everything else in life. The greatest change, though, has been within me. For so long, I defined myself primarily as Samuel's protector, measuring my worth by how much I could give to others. The wedding disaster forced me to confront how unsustainable and ultimately unhealthy that pattern had become. Learning to prioritize my own needs without guilt has been challenging and transformative. I've developed new friendships, not built around caregiving, explored interests beyond work, and even started dating again, this time with healthier expectations and boundaries. Last month, Samuel helped me move into this lakeside house, my first real investment in my own joy and peace. As we carried the last box inside, he paused on the deck, looking out at the view I had fallen in love with. "You know what I just realized," he said quietly. "This is the first major life decision I can remember you making just for yourself." The observation caught me off guard with its simple truth. "I guess you're right," I replied. He turned to me with eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm so glad you did, Lainey. You deserve this. You always have." Those words and the genuine happiness behind them healed something deep within me that I hadn't even realized was still wounded. As the sun sets over the lake, now casting long golden reflections across the water, I reflect on the strange path that led me here. Would I choose to cancel my brother's wedding again, knowing what I know now? It's a complicated question. The hurt and chaos caused were real. The financial cost was substantial. The risk to my reputation and business was significant. But sometimes the most meaningful growth comes from our most difficult decisions, the moments when we finally say enough to patterns that no longer serve us. Sometimes love means establishing consequences rather than endlessly absorbing mistreatment. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do for someone we love is to stop enabling behavior that ultimately harms them too. If you're facing a situation where your kindness is being exploited or your boundaries violated, know that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between peacekeeping and self-respect? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to show your support, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries is an act of self-love, not selfishness. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop allowing yourself to be treated as if you don't matter.